edición para nós tan especial dos Premios Rafael Crecente, teño a honra de presentarvos ao profesor Harvey Jacobs. O profesor Jacobs é catedrático emérito da Universidade de Wisconsin-Madison e tamén foi profesor visitante da Universidade de Radboud en Nijmegen. Sempre o digo mal. Nos Países Baixos. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Harvey. Na Universidade de Wisconsin, o profesor Jacobs foi presidente do Departamento de Planificación Urbana e Regional e director do Centro de Tenencia da Terra. Tamén foi presidente do Programa de Medio Ambiente e Recursos do Instituto Nelson. A súa especialidade académica son os aspectos sociais e legais da propiedade, da política territorial, con especial fincapé nos dereitos da propiedade. Tamén é experto en zonificación e ten traballado en temáticas que resultan de gran interés tamén para nós, como a expansión da dispersión urbana ou a protección das terras agrícolas cada vez máis necesaria e interesante. E xa que hoxe é día de premios, dicir tamén que na súa dilatada carreira o profesor Jacobs recibiu múltiples premios e recoñecementos á súa traxectoria e ata foi condecorado no 2008 como cabaleiro polo goberno francés coa entrega de, isto sí que non o vou dicir ben, coa entrega de l'Ordre des Palmes Académicas. Así que, agradecéndolle de corazón que teña habido esprofeso desde o estado de Nova York para estar aquí hoxe con nós neste acto, deixo-vos co Chevalier e profesor Harvey Jacobs.
Good afternoon. I apologize that I cannot lecture in Spanish. I cannot lecture in Gallego, but I will try to speak slowly and carefully so our translator can help me. But first, I want some water. When I was invited, I was told to pick any topic I would like because the members of the lab knew that Rafa and I shared many interests. So I want to start with a few words about Rafa, and I want to try not to cry. Rafa and I met in Wisconsin, and we became instant friends. Our friendship was centered on our fascination about land, everything about land. Land as a real thing, but land also as an expression of power, of control, of belonging, of relationship. And as academics, we wanted to talk to each other about policy, culture, methodology, technology, and politics, and how these interacted. And we spent a lot of time looking at our two home regions, even though they are very, very different. Galicia and, at the time, the upper part of the Middle West of the United States. So I love these photos of Rafa because what they show is how fascinated he was with landscapes, big landscapes, small landscapes. And on the bottom, that is a picture of a stone which we have on a terrace at the university because Rafa had so many friends who wanted to commemorate him and his relationship to Madison. So my the question that Rafa and I shared was about how we could have private property in the modern world and sustainable environmental management. Did they fit together? Did they conflict? What was going on? So, I want to offer some thoughts about how we make sense of these two things, private property and sustainable environmental management. And can we have private property and sustainable environmental management at the same time? I just want to say a few words about sustainable environmental management. It was already mentioned, the fires. We see every day, globally, the need for sustainable environmental management, whether it's in climate change, whether it has to do with water. We see changing weather patterns. We see the fragility of our coastal zones, very important for Galicia, and of course, the issue of wildfires. Rafa and I shared the idea that you could not have long-term sustainable environmental management unless the social and legal institution of private property could adapt. It was the failure of private property to adapt that was at the root of our ability to have and to realize sustainable environmental management. But this raises an interesting question, and the question is, what is private property? Now, there are two dominant views in the academy, in the literature, in the history, in the law, in the sociology, about private property. One view, a very dominant view these days, is that private property represents a bundle of rights. That's why this is an idea that goes back to Roman times. And the first view argues that it is essential to have private property. It is essential to have a society of private property owners, and that these owners actually are motivated to manage their land sustainably. They will act in a socially positive way. And even when they do not, the minuses will be less than the pluses. And so, a society of private property owners will be better for everyone. So this position acknowledges that there will be failures when we have a system of private property, but that the positives outweigh the negatives. This view of private property originates in the Western world with the work of Adam Smith. Adam Smith argued that if each individual pursued their own self-interest, the greater social interest would result. And we have seen a very strong resurgence of this perspective. But there is a second view of private property. And this second view of private property argues that property is socially defined, that there is no tabula rasa of private property, that society has always been in conversation with owners about what is private, what is public, what is shared, and how those concepts can be used to move society forward. This second view of private property argues that, opposite to the first view, that the owners of private property will not act socially responsible, and in fact, what they will do is act in such a way as to overtax, overuse the ecosystem. Why? Because, this argument goes, what is rational for the individual is not necessarily rational for society as a whole. This position about private property emerged in the late 1960s, based largely on an article written, interestingly, by a population biologist who was named Garrett Hardin. This is, as I note, in the United States, this is probably the most read and referenced article in the broad field of environmental studies. Hardin himself was interested, so when he said the tragedy of the commons, he was not talking about the commons in Galicia. He was talking about the atmosphere. He was talking about the oceans. He was talking about what he called natural resources used by all, but owned by none. And his argument, so he starts by arguing about this kind of commons. But very quickly, others began to take his analysis and broaden it. And what they began to argue was that there was a conflict between self-interest and social interest. And Hardin became interpreted to understand, it became understood that what he was arguing could be framed as, when individuals pursue their own self-interest, it does not result in the greater social interest. So what does this really mean? Okay, I was talking to one of the members of the lab about this yesterday. Let me give you an example. A very Galician example. You own land which is used for agriculture. You have, and let us say the land is valuable in agriculture. It's good soil, it gets good drainage, it has the opportunity to produce crops which people need. You have two choices. You're getting old, you don't want your land anymore, you are willing to sell your land. I know this is unusual in Galicia, but you have two choices. You could sell your land to someone who will use it in agriculture, and they will pay you 2,500 euros for a hectare. Or you could sell it to a land development company, and they will pay you 25,000 euros for a hectare. What will you do? Ah, see? We will all do the same thing. What is rational for me? What happens? I decide to sell my land for development. You sell your land for development. You sell your land for development. You sell your land for development. Not because any of us are bad people, but because we are acting rationally, which is what market theory, Adam Smith, tells us we should do. This notion of the conflict between self-interest and social interest has become globalized. It has been used to describe a wide variety of natural resource management problems. So, how do we solve this problem? Well, there are two broad theories, two broad solutions. Interestingly, Garrett Hardin himself argued that the tragedy of the commons could be solved by creating more private property. But others argue that there needs to be very substantial social management of private property. So, again, I will ask the question, what exactly are we talking about? What is private property? So this is the classic definition of private property, which is taught in law school around the world. Again, this Latin phrase goes back to the Romans. Whoever owns the soil owns all the way to heaven and all the way to the depths. So, this is how we come up with the idea that if you own a piece of land, you own the air above the land, and you own down. Okay? You own the water, you own the minerals, etc. But it gets a little more complicated. The rights you have in private property are actually of two types. There are the rights that are about the physical reality of the land, and then there are the rights that are about the social relationships. So, when you own land, what do you own? Well, in theory, you own the right to the soil, to the water, to the air, to the minerals, to the trees, even to the animals. My students were often very confused about this question of animals. And I would say to them, well, do you own the worm on your land? Can you take the worm and go fishing? And they would say, yes. Okay. Can you take the deer when the deer walks across your property, or the bird? Ah, that got a little more complicated. What are the social rights? Well, the social rights, which we are all aware of, you have the right to control who comes onto your property, right? The right of trespass, we call it. You have the right to use your land, but that means you also have the right to abuse your land. You have the right to sell your land. You have the right to lease your land. You have the right to transfer your land to future generations, inheritance. And you have the right, so all of these different social rights. So private property is actually a mix. It's a mix of physical rights that you have and social rights. So that's our sort of broad theoretical definition. But now let's look at what happened. What actually has happened with property? My argument throughout my career has been that property has changed. What I own is not what if my grandfather had owned, it's not what my grandfather would have owned. And it's not what his grandfather would have owned. Property changes. So why does it change? How does it change? It changes in response to technology, and it changes in response to changing social values. So, remember I said, if you own the land, you own to the heavens above. But in the early 20th century, something very funny happened. After millennia, people figured out how to fly in mechanical devices. So now, you have airplanes. Now, if I own to the heavens above, and that is mine, and the airplane is flying over, can I tell the airplane, get off? Right? We laugh at that now. But in theory, that is what I should be able to do. So after the invention of the airplane, societies around the world had to change, socially change, the definition of private property. They took away your right to the heavens above. Do I still own the air right above my property? Yes. Does it go to the heavens above? No. And actually, the closer you live to an airport and the approach and takeoff of the airplanes, the less air right you own. It also changed in response to changing social values. Here I give you some American examples where there was significant social protest in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, in the American Civil Rights Movement. Prior to this social movement, if I owned a business, I decided who got to come into my business. Just like I can decide who comes into my house. And if I didn't like your gender, the color of your skin, what I thought your religion was, I could say, no, you may not come in. And then at some point, society said, you may not do that anymore. It took away the right of commercial owners to exclude people and said you must treat everyone the same. And we can tell the same story about the transformation of the right of women to own and to participate in a variety of events. They were excluded for centuries. And eventually this began to change, and the notion of equal ownership, equal rights, equal access, which we think of as normal, was actually a revolutionary change. So, property then is these two rights combined. So then we come back. So what is it? What is property? My argument, is that property is actually a stage, just like this stage. Okay? It's a stage in which we act out very complicated plays with each other. We talk about what are the rights of the individual and the rights of society. What does it mean to be a citizen? And what does it mean to have freedom in the modern world? It's where we talk, it's how we articulate our ideas about social justice and about the rights, and this is where sustainable environmental management comes in, about the rights of future generations. So let me return to my opening question. How do we resolve, how do we reconcile the social and legal institution of private property with sustainable environmental management? Now, I will pause. For many, many years, I have gotten this far in my thinking, and people were always angry at me. Why were they angry? They would say, Professor Jacobs, tell us how to solve the problem. Don't tell us only what the problem is. What do you think will happen? So you are the audience for the first time where I tell you what I think will happen. I think many of the social rights in the private property bundle will remain. They will be what they have always been. If you own property, you own land, you own a house, you own a flat, you own a business, many of the social rights will continue. You'll be able to own, sell, lease, gift. You will continue to need to pay taxes, of course, but you'll also be able to engage in reasonable personal use, and you will be able to require government to come and help you protect your private social rights. I think private property is too strong a social and legal institution for this to change. I think the issue, the real issue, is about the physical rights in property. It is very easy for all of us to identify something bad, right? We don't want owners of rural land to clear-cut their trees. We don't want them to strip the soil. We don't want them to mine for minerals to the point that the land is ruined. We don't want them to pollute. We don't want them to dump toxic waste. These are all bads, and we can all agree these are bad. Oh, this should not happen. So how does, again, going back to individual rational, social rational, how does society deal with this? Well, we deal with it often through regulation, right? Social regulation, where we say, okay, it is your land, but. So Ines was telling me, for example, that you can't plant eucalyptus within, how many meters was it, of the edge of the highway, right? That's a social regulation intended to promote the social good, because if you left it to individuals, that it was individually owned, what would they do? They would plant. So I think that the challenge we have is that sustainable environmental management science, eco-science, agro-science, forest science, sustainability science, continues to show us how interconnected the world is and how we push down on one place and then something happens. And I think that the science we do continually reinforces the position of those who argue that property is a social creation, not something wholly within the purview of the individual. So, I think, if I get specific, I think landscape, as we look to the future, despite current political problems, and I come from the land of Trump, landscapes will get stronger rights, wildlife will get stronger rights, but government, society, will also get stronger rights to manage private property on behalf of society at large. I think the core theoretical and philosophical position of the sustainable environmental management advocates that property is socially created is fundamentally correct, and it is sound. But this is theory. Practice is different. Our colleagues were talking about translation. We have already witnessed through even just the last 100 years, how flexible property can be as technology and social values change. I think we can expect, we can demand that property continue to adapt to meet all of our needs, the needs of the owner and the needs of society at large. So, in the long term, can private property and sustainable environmental management be brought together? I think it's the wrong question. They have to be. We are not going to have a world in which there are no private property owners, and we are going to have a world in which we need sustainable environmental management. We have to figure out how to bring these two ideas together. I actually believe we have the capacity to do that, and that I believe also we will do that. Thank you.